writers who just associating with his books could lead you in trouble. A guy called Ambroise Kim subscribed to Mongo Betty's Peuple Noir, and he was arrested. Mongo Betty had to work to free him. And to tell you how very extremist and prolific he was in his thoughts and in his thinking, he was exiled from his beloved country for 32 years. I want to nuance this thought. He's given me 3 minutes, I'll take 2. Just because I really need this to be an interactive conversation. And I think this panel is for you, not us. So let me nuance this a little bit. Number one, isn't it strange how the works of public intellectuals in Africa are hidden from Africans? Think. When I was growing up, I didn't study Mongo Betty in class. I studied De Gaulle in class. For what reason? Ask yourself. The second one for me is, why sometimes do public intellectuals on the continent start so strong and then switch sides? What's the reason? Is it resources, repression? Are they supported? What's the quality of life that they live? How abnormal are their lives? And so and the last one, really and truly for me, is, are student unions dying where intellect is bred and where advocacy starts? Are those places a cause of concern where we need to begin to look at how their decline should be resuscitated? Those are the 3 nuances I want to throw before I jump in real quick. And I want to say that in the formation of soldiers on the battlefield, in the war for better for our people, public intellectuals are the strategists. They are the master stroke. They are those who jolt our thinking. They are those who define our tactics. They are those who shape consciousness, who awaken, the sleeping giant in us. They are those who make you believe that you will win. You can win. Here's how to win. And the historical context for me is that we have had so much authoritarian rule. Currently, Cameroon is the best kept secret on the continent for repression, dictatorship, gerontocracy, authoritarian rule. In fact, Freedom House failed to tell us right now where we stand in the index, because we have a foreigner for a president who sojourns in Geneva and visits Cameroon. The current context is that there are significant gaps in education and poverty on the continent, which means that many of our leaders have weaponized 1, education, and 2, poverty. Therefore, these gaps make it difficult for people to participate in political process and hold leaders' foot to the fire. So, public intellectuals do and can use their platforms to raise awareness of these issues and advocate for solutions. Why are public intellectuals so critical, so important? First, because of our continent's history of authoritarian rule, like I said. Second, that there are significant gaps in education and poverty. And third, that public intellectuals use their platforms to raise awareness. I'm going to stop there with a quote from the great Achille Bembe. If one is not a human being, what is one? Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Please pass the mic to Krua. Oh, you have one as well.
Oh,
okay.
I have one.
Then I can get that one. Sure.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kululwa. Can you hear me? Kululwa Mti from South Africa. My take on public intellectuals, I decided to give it a different take and focus more on the side of the organic intellectual and its erasure from the academic studies. The conditions of our African society seem to sometimes overwhelm the theories that are currently used. And the problem, okay, can you not hear me? Okay. And the problem, from my understanding, can be detected in the disjuncture between the university-certified knowers and the organic knowers. It needs to be dismissed that only knowledge that is through books and writing is valid. Where I come from, in the isiXhosa society, recording of people's experiences and knowledge by means of writing only emerged in the 1800s. Before contact with literary and West prominent forms of communication, knowledge dissemination were through oral literary art forms such as idioms, myths, praise songs. The Academy mostly uses writings of missionaries in South Africa as primary resources of evidence in providing an account of African societies before colonialism. So for the purposes of this panel, I will look closely into the institution, the academic institution, and I focus on how academics in South Africa, since the rise of the 2015 student movements, the Rhodes Must Fall and the Fees Must Fall, have started to make a shift towards revisiting the archives, trying to reposition the erased organic intellectuals, particularly women, and I'll be focusing on women, back into the democratic dialogue. We know that the liberation struggle historically has been centered around men, elite men and women. It is very rare to find scholarship that focuses on the ordinary people from the ground that had contributed both intellectually and in the military underground practices of the armed struggle. I used 3 works of South African black women scholars, namely Ubaba Makoqwana, who's at NMU, Spokazi Makadla, and Lihle Ngcobo, to show the importance of public intellectuals or organic intellectuals in the academic market and how dealing with erasures in history can be done through the academic process. So, I don't know how I'm doing for time.
Just 1 minute.
1 minute, okay. So, I'm just going to briefly highlight what Babaraz talks about and what Spokazi talks about and what Lihle talks about. So in the invention of the colonial and apartheid university in South Africa, these establishments or these institutions did not include women as they were not considered as first-class citizens. So what does this mean? It means that narratives in academics and in teaching does not center any, or at the initial stages though, but the process has been started now. Ubaba Makoqwana implores us to think of umakhulu, an ordinary old woman. Umakhulu is a grandmother in isiXhosa. And she positions a grandmother as an institution of knowledge. What in that organic person, in that organic intellectual can we learn in order to reposition the deleted African women's encounters and forces in the ways towards recuperating African people? It is through making these structures and that society can begin to decolonize and deconstruct the stretches of pilgrims through frameworks and to additionally deconstruct efforts in the socialization of the African family. To move on, Spokazi takes a different approach to repositioning organic black women intellectuals. And in her book that she released this year, Guerrillas and Combative Mothers, Women and the Armed Struggle, Makala points out that women's contribution in the armed struggle have been erased in public culture and in academic and non-academic research. It is only those in the MK that are able to speak about their experiences and how they have been brushed away in the history. Scholars like Makadle have started to practice the act of looking at women as public intellectuals that have been erased in the liberation movement and contend with these and bringing them back into the archives. I'm skipping because it's time.
Yeah,
okay, so I'll come back with the rest of the arguments.
I think that's a good way to start. Jerry?
Hello, good morning, salams, bonjour. I want to begin with a disclaimer that I am not an intellectual, but a beneficiary and mentee of many, 4 of whom I shall use in my presentation. I also wish to touch on 3 things that were in the concept paper, all relating to intellectualism, one on anti-colonial struggle, the other one on intellectuals themselves and academicians, and the other one on social movements, because those 3 things stood out for me in the concept. Now, on the anti-colonial struggle, all my 3 examples and discussions are going to be based on Kenya. because there are representatives from most of the countries, so I don't want to make an error by jumping into your country and saying something that may be incorrect, so let me stick to Kenya. And on the anti-colonial struggle, I want to discuss the Mau Mau, the role of intellectuals vis-a-vis freedom fighters. And the paper, the concept paper implies that intellectuals are the ones that were behind the freedom struggles in various countries. And I want to say that in Kenya, what we found is that most freedom fighters were killed and discarded by intellectuals when the intellectuals took over and when Kenya gained independence. So for us, the role of intellectuals at the freedom struggle level is a weak role because they kind of betrayed the freedom movement and ended up having the freedom fighters, as they are negotiating with the colonialists, the freedom fighters were being killed. So, and at the time, the intellectuals were not at the level that we have here, people with PhDs, even masters. They were just people who had gone maybe to England, done a small course, come back, gone to some other country, done one course. Those were the intellectuals, they were advantageous. They had been given advantage. And I also want to note that until 2003, August 2003, the Mau Mau was still an outlawed organization, and it was called a terrorist organization in our statutes. So it wasn't until 2003, after one of the Mau Mau people petitioned Parliament, that the title terrorism was removed and they were no longer outlawed. So you can see the role of the intellectuals who took over power wanted Mau Mau to remain as a terrorist organization all the years. So for us, the intellectual level, the intellectual contribution during our freedom struggle is a weak one, not a strong one. And then I want to discuss a few intellectuals because they moved me, but also because of the role. They moved from the classroom to the streets, to the theater halls, and to other places where they could engage directly with the people. One of them is Professor Ngugi wa Thiong'o, the renowned academician and writer. For me, as I was in high school, growing up, we would be sneaked out by our teachers to go and watch his band plays. And that is where our activism started being, first of all, that you can do things despite a very oppressive government, and then that you can actually write and dare a government. So that was Professor Ngugi wa Thiong'o. Up to today, he's still defying. He now writes it in his mother tongue, the Gikuyu language, rather than writing in English, which is what he started off. Then the other one is Professor Wangari Maathai. She was a veterinarian. She studied veterinary, and she was the chair of the veterinary department, but moved out of the university and went to discuss human rights, peace, and finally the world knows her as an environmentalist. Intellectuals who left the university, who left the classroom, while they could still have been there, and went and convinced people that there's a different way of living and a different way of doing things. Then the other one is Professor Michelle Regedai Mogo. We are just celebrating her now. She passed away not less than a month ago. And she was a political activist who fought for human rights and against abuses in Kenya. As a young intellectual woman, she had to go into exile with her children. And also, she continued to be in the classroom. Unlike Wangari Maathai, she continued to be in the classroom, but very defiant of the colonial teaching. And she continued to teach differently. And finally, people may find him controversial, but he's one of my mentees, Professor PLO Lumumba, because of his anti-corruption zeal and his Pan-Africanist spirit. These people could just remain in the classrooms, but they have refused. They go out there and they discuss things that we want to hear and that encourage us. But a lot of intellectuals remain in the classroom, and then we never get to know what they studied. And finally, I just want to discuss people's movements. In Kenya, I saw there were a few people's movements named in the concept, And I want to just share some information about what we call in Kenya the social justice centers. These are centers that are founded by community activists, and they were founded in the slums. And they have a very interesting motto. They say their motto is organize, educate, and liberate. So they are in the slums and they are developing their own intellectual capacity because they realize they will never go to universities. They are disadvantaged. So they have their own little groups of intellectual studying and sharing, and they have become very powerful movements, social movements in Kenya. And finally, to conclude, intellectuals, and if you are here, you are one of them, intellectuals are advantaged and occupy a privileged position in society. They should always use this for the betterment of their society and not use the privilege for personal gain. We found in Kenya, in terms of leadership, our leadership always uses the positions that they get for personal gain. Whether politician, whether you are in the university, you just do minimal. Yet you are the one who's advantaged and privileged. So my call is, don't do minimal, do more, get out of the classroom, go out there and work with the communities. They are anxious for the knowledge that you have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pano. Wonderful. I think that gives us a very good starting point. And I want to try to summarize what the panelists have said, but 3 quick points from each of the the 3 panelists. One is really, Catherine is telling us the fact that the public intellectuals have not been able to communicate enough. The hidden Cameroon. And I think there are so many countries, by around that region, Cameroon, there are so many countries that are hidden. Cameroon, Gabon, Congo, Brazzaville, you rarely hear of them. And I think it gets worse when you begin to combine the francophone and the anglophone. These phones also become a problem for us. The 2 phones. I think Kulua basically helped expand that discussion by looking at actually the public intellectuals outside the academy to choose who should speak from that side. On this side, I have the authority.
Thank you so much.
Just 4 of them, and then you get back the audience to me.
Thank you so much, and for having all women panelists. I think it's a very good one. So I listened to Catherine, and I think what is very, very important that we need to underscore. Thank you. I think what is very, very important that we need to underscore is the fact that from Athens to the present moment, books have been very, very significant to civilization and the advancement of humanity. And what we are finding now, particularly in the context where I live and where I work, is the fact that the universities in particular, which you reference, which are supposed to be the center where ideas are being discussed and then next generation of leaders are being raised, what we are rather experiencing there now are 2 things. One, there is no openness for critical engagement. It is whatever you are taught, and students do not really have the opportunity to raise dissenting opinion right from the classroom and even beyond that classroom. And then the second thing is that we are witnessing what I would consider like a subnational authoritarianism manifesting in those places. So universities are being shut down because students protest or because they are raising a dissenting voice. And then we are getting to the point that rather than fostering these ideas of raising the next public intellectuals, because I think the responsibility of those who are actually in the academic war is to raise those who will go to the society and then drive the next form of development of civilization and critical thinking. Okay. So when we have this challenge, how do we address raising the next generation of leaders if the university space is getting constrained right from the lectures that we have yesterday and even what we are engaging with now?
All right, thank you very much. Let's get contributions that are strictly 1 minute, please, because we agreed our time is constrained. These contributions must be strictly 1 minute.
Okay. Thank you very much. My name is Dikile Mukwena. I am a lecturer in South Africa. I just want a question to one of the panelists. So you mentioned earlier, which I think the statement that you highlighted with regards to your critique, that there are other forms of knowledge and that for some reason there was a privileging of literary textual knowledge, right, as opposed to other forms of knowledges that existed and also disseminated in other ways, like for instance through oral traditions and other poetry and other forms, right, which is essentially that's the legacy that we've had in the African continent, including also literary texts as well, right? Because even writing systems, we've always had those even before colonizers came. So we're all aware of that. However, then in your presentation, as you were concluding, you seemed to be privileging again the literary text by saying you're actually bringing all of this knowledge from Boma Kulu into the archive. That is, again, you're privileging the literary, which is basically a Western colonial sense of what is written as what matters. I just wanted you to sort of be mindful of that.
Okay.
And then also,
can you kindly leave it to that, please?
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Next.
Yes,
Only
thank
two
you.
of them, and then we'll proceed.
Thank you, presenters. I have a general question to all of you. So my sister from Cameroon talked about how intellectuals sidelined freedom fighters, but this happens in every struggle where people appropriate ideas, appropriate struggles, and then they make something out of it. We hear about it, like how we know about Ngugi, how we know about other, who we call public intellectuals. But I think Okot Bitek, who I also consider a public intellectual, did summarize this very well in his book called Two Songs. One song of a prisoner, what happened after independence. The other one is called Song of Malaya, how women's labor is appropriated by politicians, working men and other people. And for me, that is the question. Really, how do we go back from, because even as we are speaking, we are appropriating other people's struggles. We're not struggling ourselves. I think it's the grandmas that our sister from South Africa is speaking about. I think it's our mothers, it's other people out there who are struggling. How, again, are we going to channel this back to the people? All of us know who PLO Lumumba is, but what does that mean for a daily person out there struggling in the, in the streets? So that's the question. We appropriate, how do we give back?
All right, thank you. Thank you. The last one?
Thank you. I'm Jerry Mwangi from the Organic Intellectuals Network from the social movement, from the social justice movement in Kenya. And first, I want to thank the panelists for their contribution. And also, just a comment, I loved what Jerry has just said, that I think it's our role as intellectuals, also the organic intellectuals, to link the academia and the social justice movement. And also, I think the other role of the academia is first to also appreciate that also lived experience from people or from the people who are working in the movement can be a critical resource to the broad intellectual movement. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mwangi. I think now if anybody who wants to see how an organic intellectual looks like, you know where to direct your attention. Yeah. So let's come back to the panel. And I think that questions have been posed to Kulu and Catherine. But Catherine, as you speak, I also want you to reflect on, from your experience, are there specific things we can count as success stories of public intellectuals that have actually provided leadership and pushed the pro-democracy movement, a step further? Any success stories you can share? And I will get back to the audience because I want us to be able to hear those success stories from your different backgrounds once Catherine and Kuru have interjected at this point.
Thank you. Let me just quickly address my comrade sister about appropriation. I wasn't referring to appropriation at all. I grew up reading Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, and I can quote his books. I was referring to the need for us to know our own in our context first, and to prioritize our own dynamics. In the later time of my schooling, I also read Chinua Achebe. And these are people like Mam Jerry who opened my thinking. I couldn't connect to Antoine de Saint-Exupéry the way I could connect to Chinua Achebe. These are people who wrote in my language, in the way that, and so it was easier for me to understand the principles and the concepts and the strategies they shared in their books in order for me to implement them. That's what I meant. Of course, these two can, they can live together, learning from other examples in other climes and also using our own local, hyper-local context. So I just wanted to address that. And thank you for that. In terms of the examples from Cameroon, there are so many. The context really in Cameroon, like Mam and Jerry spoke to the context in Kenya, is that the public intellectual movement really and truly started from the backdrop of the killing of freedom fighters. So it's actually the reverse in my country. Mongo Betty started writing after the execution of Ernest Wandie and the freedom fighters who fought against colonialism. So indeed, our public intellectual movements came as a backdrop of trying to support the freedom fighters, to provide knowledge to the polity who needed that knowledge for power. In Cameroon, we have Albert Mukong. Mukong was a journalist, he was a lawyer, a political activist, and a leading figure in the independence movement. So you see, the whole concept is people really bringing knowledge because of trouble. And this is a guy who was arrested and detained on several occasions. He raised awareness for political reform in Cameroon, and he's considered one of the founding fathers of the nation state, as it were. We also have the women who advocated with movement. So I'm happy that Mam Jerry also mentioned the fact that it's not just public intellectual individuals, they're also movements. She created, Blandina Tunga created a Women's Empowerment Network, which really is focused on women's rights and inclusion. There's also the Cameroonian Association of Writers. These guys were founded in 1960. In 1960, French Cameroon got its independence. So you can see the trajectory there. These guys promoted the use of literature and published several anthologies to ensure that people were aware. Okay. I can stop there and let others carry on.
Yeah. Yes, Kurowa.
Thank you very much for your questions. Comments as well. I do take them and I don't take them lightly. To answer my brother, that the first question or the first comment, I do agree with him that the institutions have not been... oh, I thought you were raising your hand. The institutions have not been spaces of rigor and have stopped being critical engagement spaces, simply because the institutions have become gatekeepers of knowledge. And this is why I took this approach to this presentation to say, look, yes, there are public intellectuals that we know, but how about we go back to the community, the family structure as an institution, our grandmothers, our mothers, and the one that I did not mention is Ulihle Unaweza, who speaks about Mamabo Manyano and their contribution in the liberation struggle. But now, these conversations are unable to happen because, again, academics are unwilling. There's a nervousness or a nervous condition when it comes to having to go and unravel that truth. People are comfortable in their spaces. People are comfortable in the academy, and that is a problem. So now this is why I ask about how do we then bridge this disjuncture between the organic intellectual and the traditional intellectual? Because I think that our answers lie in that collaborative effort between those. How do we meet each other in the middle? Then I think that would be the revival of critical engagement. Also, coming up with different frameworks and different languaging and different ways of putting what our struggle is and how we got to this democracy and how to move forward. So thank you for that. And to my sister that's cautioning me about the archives and ways of documenting and archiving, I'm absolutely aware and critical of that. But also the archiving conversation is a different one, because now when we want to decolonize and we want to decolonize the curriculum and put these things into the archiving, we need to find ways that are African centers, that are self-clarifications on how to archive these narratives and these important institutions of knowledge. And that must come from us. We must not be told by European entrenched ways of archiving how to archive our histories and how to archive the findings that we find. And lastly, to the sister at the back, I agree with you. I don't think I need to answer you. But yes, I think my point exactly is what you're saying, is that the people that suffer the most are the people back in our African villages, in our African townships. So in South Africa, I come from a township. But also within those spaces, there are intellectuals, there's knowledge there that nobody wants to tap into, which will be able to explain to us why our society is the way that it is without being in the university. So yeah.
Okay, just before I bring in Jerry again, I just wanted to pose this question, because if the university is still seen as the birthplace of some of these public intellectuals, and I think there are signals that are suggesting that space is being constrained. There is also a very clear dichotomy that I can see in Uganda. I don't know how other countries are, but you can see a very clear dichotomy between public universities and private universities. In public universities, you are really beginning to see the growth of autocratic leadership that is making it impossible for both students and academicians to be able to engage in free expression. So I wanted to throw this back to the audience and say, are there, in your respective countries and institutions, are there success stories that are pushing the limits of this constrained space that we can learn from? That where you think that, yes, these things are happening and they are good learning points for anybody who is engaged in this public intellectual discourse or spaces. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abba Danladi from Nigeria. I want to respond to the question Kathy asked about why is it that the works of African public intellectuals are hidden from Africans? And this speaks to the global North-South dichotomy, power play that goes on in the publishing industries. Who controls, who are the major publishers, who are the editors, who determine the kind of content or the kind of articles that get published in some of these things. And research and reports are showing that Africa, there's a disproportionate representation of African in most of these publication outlets, Routledge, Dela and Francis, and the rest of them. And so it's a major challenge. And more importantly, to the question you just asked, in Nigeria, public intellectuals, particularly from the Africans, were relevant during the decolonial or nationalist movements. Even in trying to confront the military rule, you remember Wole Soyinka severally was thrown into jail and the rest of them. And so many of them from Ibadan, Lagos, were also active in confronting the military rule. But what we are witnessing now is a gagging, a gagging of public intellectuals in Nigeria through systemic or strategic means, underfunding, and then politicization, ensuring that people who speak against, governments are punished, either by being denied promotion or by being, there's so many being denied some juicy appointment. And so people often would like to toe in with the line of government. In private universities is even the worst, because he who pays the piper is the owner of the university, who often determines how things work. So that is the challenge you are facing in Nigeria from a personal experience of what's going on in my campus. Thank you.
Now, my brother, I said I'm a teacher. So if you were answering my question, you would be in trouble. You've only added to the knowledge of our problem. I am asking, are there some examples, some success stories that we think we can learn from. Yeah, because the problem, we have already stated it. Are there some some experiences that we can learn from as a people? So, but I'll give you a pass mark, no worries. Yeah.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Tuluma Nkasela. Am I speaking low? My name is Tuluma Nkasela. I'm from South Africa. The question I have is that, one, how do we deal with our own complicitness in erasing other forms of public intellectuals or like knowledge, basically? Because I can say for a fact, if I was a regular Joe on the streets, I would have not been invited to this conference. So how do we then reach out to people on the ground from a grassroots level and harness that knowledge? Because us here sitting ourselves are like very complicit in that. I want to make an example. For beginning of year in 2022 in South Africa, Parliament was burnt. And the man that was arrested was a homeless man. And everyone was like, no way, they're like just pinning this on him. No way he knows anything about that, or he could have protested in this way and that way. But like in the following appearances, this man was saying things where everyone was like, maybe he could have. But everyone had judged him on the fact that he's scum of society, he is homeless, so there is no way that he knows anything about anything. And that is something that we all complicit in, because public knowledge and public intelligentsia can be found at the shibeen, at the church, wherever. And so as the people here, how do we then harness it? Because at the same time, we need to harness it to improve the freedoms and the democracies. And I think that is where this conversation is ultimately pointing towards.
All right, thank you. I want to again plead that I am the only one asking questions. I still want to hear, because right from here we need to help ourselves to go beyond where we are. So that's why I'm really insisting that if there are those experiences that you can share that can enable us in terms of how to deal with the challenge, I really don't want to lose my next 5 minutes before I can hear some of them.
If you are not hearing them, maybe they don't exist.
Oh, maybe they don't exist. Okay, all right. Or Andrew is picking people who do not have experiences. Okay, just proceed. Andrew, you are still picking people? Yeah, okay, all right. The mic doesn't seem to be enabled.
Je crois que réunis ici pour parler de l'état de droit, de la démocratie, il me plaît quand on parle de l'espace académique avec les intellectuels de mentionner l'expérience du Bénin, qui abrite en fait une chaire UNESCO des droits de la personne et de la démocratie, laquelle chaire travaille sérieusement à une prise de conscience et de connaissance des universitaires sur le niveau d'appartenance en fait à certaines universalités des droits de l'homme, ainsi que une appropriation fondamentale des notions liées à la démocratie. Et ça suscite davantage au niveau des jeunes une certaine adhésion aux principes structurants l'état de droit et de la démocratie. Je dirige une ONG qui, au niveau de son staff, n'a que comme ressources humaines, en réalité, les produits de cette chaire UNESCO qui fait du bon travail au niveau donc, de l'élite. C'est toujours intéressant quand l'université a des institutions qui répondent, c'est-à-dire de ses ambitions en matière de démocratie et d'état de droit. Merci.
J'aimerais savoir, mon camarade du Bénin, là, j'aimerais savoir quand même si vous avez quelques cas de succès par rapport à la discussion que vous pouvez partager, sinon quand même le nom de votre ONG.
Okay, all right.
Huge thank you to all the speakers for the very, very insightful presentations. I think I've got 2 points. One is that intellectuals could really help shape policy offerings, help come up with ideas that politicians could implement. But I think the elephant in the room is here is that there is a perception in society in Africa that intellectuals are a bit snobbish. There is an intellectual snobbery. And that snobbery means they don't really relate with the masses. So I don't know what the intellectuals here would say about that, because African society is very hierarchical. And what people think is difficult. The intellectuals are unapproachable. So how do we tackle that problem?
Okay, so let me get to one person and then I'll get back to the panel.
Yes, my name is Jame from South Sudan. I come from a country where the president is given absolute authority and power to decide who should be the vice chancellor of each of the universities. This is a president who probably do not even understand how university operates. He appoints the VCs. My country is also a place where in most of the universities there is a deployment of security agencies to listen to who is saying what about the government. So once you have this setting, you are automatically killing intellectualism. So what we are saying is that in such countries where these dubious powers are enshrined in whatever law to empower the president must be removed, so that in an event that a vice chancellor, for example, is to be appointed, there should be a due process of those who understand how the systems work. So this is what we should be pushing for. We should also be demanding that the country should stop militarizing institutions of learning. And therefore, where there is a deployment of this kind of security agents to listen to what people say, then that means that we are ending the ability of people to freely exercise their right and talk about whatever is happening in the country. So we must demand the removal of that one. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much, our brother from Sudan, South Sudan. Let me bring in Jerry first. Yes.
There's a promise.
Huh?
There's a promise that we answer the question.
Okay. I'll take the promise. Okay.
I think, can you hear me? Yes. To answer your question, I think in the 1960s, 1970s, the African University was quite a space for public intellectualism. Probably I will cite the University of Dar es Salaam as one of these success stories as a center for public intellectualism. But the challenge of public intellectualism now, and of course me being at the university, and an African university as it is, there are calls to return back the African university to public intellectualism. And one of the attempts, and I like Kulua was, as just said, is to dismantle the colonial library. And this is the transformative effort that many universities in Africa, we have to give them credit to some extent, that are trying, right, to dismantle this colonial library and to bring back these epistemic knowledges in the curriculum. And I think there could be...
Are they destroying the buildings or the books themselves? What are they destroying?
The colonial,
library.
The colonial library is more about, you know, not just text. Yeah. It's not just about, but bringing in epistemic knowledges, okay, which Kulua is talking about.
Okay. All right. So we have about 10 minutes remaining. I want to come back to my panel. But just to say that listening to the conversation again, you see how we talk about the things of the past with nostalgia. I hope you feel that conversation. It's like, okay, so we are at this place, and as I listen to the contributions, I'm asking myself, our sister from Freedom House, and I'm like, but these things are not captured in the Freedom House assessments. Probably, if you look at the indicators, probably they will not be looking at the universities and other institutions of learning. Most like they look at the judiciary and look at the legislature and look at the police, but actually the spaces where discourse on democracy and freedom is taking place, probably they are not looking at some of the things. And I think it's a challenge that we need to give to ourselves. So let me invite Catherine to come in and us. Yeah, and Jerry. Let me invite Jerry to come in and actually just speak towards the conclusion of how you think we should be ending, because I'll give Catherine and Kwalua to close up again, because we only have 10 minutes remaining.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I have like three small points. One on the Sudan. I think what my brother from Sudan is raising is exactly how Kenya was in the 80s. But it changed through the efforts of the ordinary citizen. It wasn't by the wish of the president or the wish of anyone, but the ordinary citizen demanded that there must be change. That's when nearly all the lecturers who were progressive had to go into exile or were jailed or were killed. That was exactly how it was in Kenya, but it is different, and you know it. So therefore, it can be different, and I just want to give you that as a word of encouragement. Everything can change. And in terms of somebody earlier had talked about the freedom struggles and why freedom fighters are always killed. And I think that's common in all our countries. And then we must realize no wonder Africa's democracy hasn't been working for 60 to 50 years, because the people who had the vision, the people who went to fight, the people who knew what they were fighting for are never allowed to take leadership. They are killed just before, or jailed forever, just before an independence deal is made. So we have to turn this around. It's for most of us it's late, but countries are still struggling. And we are struggling because we have armchair leaders who have no intellectual capacity and who have no freedom interest. Those are our leaders. We have intellectuals who have also become armchair because they are just watching and they are amazed at the loss and what is happening, and yet they have all this knowledge and they are not utilizing this knowledge for the benefit of the ordinary citizen who will never see a university. So what I'm saying is that, and somebody asked, what should they do? You really do have to design ways to calm down. Like the four people I mentioned, Professor Ngugi wa Thiong'o, Wangari Maathai, they came down. They came down to the people because they realized it's so hierarchical, the people cannot reach them. So because the people cannot reach you at that intellectual level, it is your responsibility, because you have the privilege, to come down to the people. Let me end there.
Okay, thank you. Kulua?
So I need to answer the question?
Yeah. No, basically, as you wind up, you can just reflect on those experiences that you think we can learn from, or if you have any final message to give to our audience.
Okay. If we had time, I would definitely test this thing here, because as the sister from South Africa is saying, we are here, there's some sort of privilege that we harder to be here that allows us to be here. But then I would pose the question, are there any public or organic intellectuals amongst us who would then be able to tell us what the actual problem is that they are experiencing in relation to the traditional intellectuals? Because I think that conversation, if you'd have them here, because I know that the intellectuals here, I know that people are PhDs, they're professors, there's everyone here, to have that conversation in a genuine manner that actually centers the organic intellectual itself. But also, for me, in closing, I really think that the teaching and learning process in institutions of learning needs to aim at the self-clarification of students in their intellectual stimulation. Because these so-called valid processes of knowledge making have always been by those who have not been affected by colonialism. The current form of universities are based on the concept of a gatekeeper community that is influenced by the post-European Renaissance, where the academics and students are privileged. However, this model would not work because it does not embody the aspirations of African people, even though these universities are in Africa. Therefore, decolonization does not merely mean access to institutions of learning and being able to afford them, but at the crux of the work that needs to be done is on the content of the curricula, the process of knowledge production and its authenticity and authority. Who owns it? The power of the university. And I think I'll end there.
Oh, okay, thanks very much. And finally, Catherine.
So we're talking about the weaponization of education, right? And I want us as Africans to not understand, because we understand the issues. I want us to accept the issues. They like say, many of us here have not accepted, the issues that we have. Our presidents, our leaders have weaponized knowledge. They don't want anybody to know. And we too, because of that, there's, there are repercussions for that. In Cameroon, for example, one of the methods that was used to protest against the marginalization of the Anglophones, which has led to a 6+ year crisis, was no school. I found it so ridiculous that you will say, I want to not be marginalized by making sure that everybody in my region does not go to school. For years, our young people have not gone to school in the Northwest and Southwest region, and it has only slowly and gradually resumed with people's innocent kids shot in a school when they dared to go get educated. Please, we need to accept our problems. And I've still asked the question, how much is the budget for education in your country compared to the budget of the National Assembly? How much is a public intellectual, a lecturer, the lecturers in the room, show of hands, how much are you paid? And so, I want to conclude by connecting the challenges to the resolution. Number one, repression and intimidation. Our public intellectuals are faced with slaps, strategic lawsuits and against public, participation, threats, harassment. How do we counter that to ensure that they continue to provide, or play the role that they will play? Financial constraints. Dr. Danladi talked about how publishers are muzzled. Money is not provided. How do we counter, that production of knowledge? Lack of access to the media. I have a media background. A public intellectual or an intellectual will develop knowledge. We will not make it, frontliner aware. Us as journalists, media houses, what do we do? Divisive politics. When are we going to form strategic consensus and alliances for common goals that allow us to pass the baton? A public intellectual has done his own. Let me do my own. Cultural norms. Someone talked about, how public intellectuals are unapproachable. Why? Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, had a workshop for a very long time to try and bridge the generational divide of public intellectuals in Nigeria. She would come home and she would teach other, young writers how to write. And finally, personal safety. How are we safeguarding and ensuring that our public intellectuals are well and fine? We must accept our issues, build multi-stakeholder coalitions, refuse to close the generation, refuse to, increase the generational divide, and then pass the baton. Just do your own in your own office of the citizen. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you very much, the panel. I must confess that if there is any panel session I have ever chaired and I have gone away with more questions than answers, it is this one. I must confess. Because I am looking at the environment in which public intellectuals have to work. I am looking at the closing of the spaces within which they work. We talked about the universities. I follow the I'm a student of militarism. I follow the emergence of this axis of what I call military monarchies, emerging all the way from Chad through Guinea, through Cameroon, through Uganda to Rwanda and elsewhere. If you look around, you'll see all these presidents who have been around for a long time. They have recruited their sons in the military, and they are promoting them fast track. So you can follow them. If you are a public intellectual, and you are expecting that this space is going to open up very easily, you just need to be prepared that it's going to be a hard fight. Yeah, it's going to be a hard fight, and I think Catherine talked about building these alliances, and I think that as a continent, of course, we rarely talk to each other so much. But I think the cross-border alliances of these intellectuals is going to be an important, probably, intervention in how we try to shield ourselves against the restrictions and the violence and the insecurity that we'll find everywhere in the public spaces, but also that is now creeping into the lecture room. So once again, thank you very much, Jerry. Thanks, Catherine. Thanks, Kulua. And thank you, the audience, for being a very interactive and writing audience. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, over to my team. I must apologize. We've exceeded our time by 1 minute. My apologies.
Thank you, and let's appreciate Godbert Mshabe for being a fantastic moderator. Thank you very much.